Hola amigos, buenos días, buenas tardes, tal vez buenas noches. Estamos aquí en semana 5. Tiene 3 tareas esta semana. 1, 2, 3. Primer trabajo es buena gente. So, either watch the Buena Gente video or you come to Spanish Cafe. In Spanish Cafe, this week we'll be working on, we'll be role-playing a story. And that story is The Passport. Next week, this is week 4, next week we're going to be role-playing A Very Big Family. And I hope to see you here on Mondays and Tuesdays to work on these Duolingo stories. Or, I'm sorry, on Wednesdays and Thursdays to do the Duolingo stories. Okay, and then your second assignment, which I'm going to go into more depth on today, is Duolingo. And then your third assignment, which we do in class on Mondays and Tuesdays, is Canta y Baila. So we'll have a song that we practice on Monday and Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you in class to do that. If you can't make it to class, then the lyrics are here. This, by the way, is our last online class because week 6 we'll all be back in person, and I'm getting the classroom ready for you. As you can see, I'm really looking forward to it. So let's dive deep into Duolingo. Okay, so this week I'd really like you to check out some of the other options in Duolingo. One option are the stories that I just talked about. If you've been coming to class, you're familiar with those stories that we act out. Another option are the podcasts. So let's take a look at those. What I'm going to ask you to do this week, week 5, is to watch a podcast. And first I'm going to teach you how to shop for a podcast. So we're going to shop for a podcast, and then I want you to watch the podcast, and then you have to answer these questions. Provide me with a link to the podcast you watched so I can watch it too, if you recommend that. What is it about the podcast that interests you? Why did you pick that podcast? Summarize the podcast in a few sentences. So it's got to be at least 3 sentences long. You have to tell me what this podcast is about. And bonus points if you do your summary in Spanish. How did the podcast change how you think about the topic? Did you know anything about the topic before? Did it challenge what you already understood or your preconceived notions? Or was it basically stuff you already knew? List 1 new vocabulary word you learned in the story. And would you recommend that I watch this podcast? Tell me why or why not. Specific answers. All right, so let's take a look at the podcast. Okay, so when you first go to the podcast, let me show you how to get to this podcast page. First, when you go to Duolingo, you see this bar up at the top, and you always, when you enter, it always looks like this in the Learn, and then there's the Stories bar. Over here is the More bar. I want you to go to the More bar, and I want you to click on Podcast. And then it'll start with the most recent podcast, which is episode 72. That's like the 3rd story, I think, in a series on a robbery. There's the robbery, there's the trial, there's the plan, there's the arrests, there's the hunt. Oh, actually, there's quite a few in this series. So that's page 1 of 15. I want you to go back all the way and look through all the options you have. You could read a story about a frog, una rana. You could read a story about la abuela, the grandma, who became a superstar. You could read about Teresa Valcarce, who found a lost painting and returned it to its rightful home. You can listen to a story about a man who sings indigenous rap music. Super cool. So as you can see, and you have to go way down to the bottom to this little tiny symbol at the bottom to shop around. So there's 70-something podcasts. I have not listened to them all, and I want you to tell me which ones to listen to. I've read this. I've listened to this one on the Art of Coffee, and I like it, so you don't need to tell me about that one, but you can listen to it if you like. This one sounds really interesting, and I haven't listened to it yet, so if you want to listen to this one and tell me if it's good or not, this is a podcast about a woman who grew up in a home without books, and where that took her dream to have her own library. So there's just a few examples of the podcasts that you can listen to this week. Make sure when you listen to the podcast, you fill out the podcast response form. And that will probably take a lot less time than doing the regular Duolingo assignments. So I encourage you to do one of those podcasts this week. All right. Adiós, amigos. Hasta luego.